Buckle up, this one's going to be a bumpy ride. Join us as we explore the haunting case of Theresa Ann Bier, a young woman who vanished without a trace. Was she a victim of foul play, or was Bigfoot to blame? Welcome to our channel, where we drink heavily and explore the darkest corners of humanity. You're going to want to pour yourself a stiff one tonight, because this story involves some shady characters, meth, and a Sasquatch. On April 16, 1971, Shirley and David Bier welcomed baby girl Teresa. They lived in Fresno, California, and apparently Shirley and David were terrible parents. In fact, Shirley was particularly abusive. When Teresa was just 3 years old, she ended up in the hospital when Shirley had purposely broken Teresa's leg. As a result of the incident, social services intervened and removed Teresa and her siblings from their mother's care. This was also when Teresa's dad divorced crazy Shirley, and Teresa was then placed in foster care. A few years later, David, her father, decided that he wanted custody of Teresa, and he had gotten remarried to a beautiful woman named Margie Richmond. Now, keep up here because this gets a little confusing, but Margie, Teresa's stepmother, had previously been married to her mother, Shirley's brother, John Richmond, and they had 2 daughters together. So David, Teresa's dad, is granted custody of Teresa, and the family moves to Southern California. David got a job as a janitor, and he had horrible taste in women because, as it turns out, Margie is also super abusive towards her kids, and now Teresa's in the mix as well. One time, Margie allegedly locked her refrigerator and just sat there and ate her lunch and wouldn't give the children anything to eat. So Teresa's like, F this, I'm out of here, and she eventually moves to Fresno to live with her great-grandmother. Soon after, Teresa's uncle, John Richmond, decides he wants to take care of Teresa, and unfortunately, he was granted custody. Things don't get any better for Teresa at her uncle's place because her uncle and his friends are allegedly sexually abusing her. Theresa Ann Bier's life was seriously far from easy. She was just a teenager, and she was often forced to play the role of a caregiver to her cousins. She's being abused, and she's like totally lost. She missed school a lot and struggled to keep up with her studies. In high school, Teresa's teachers kind of labeled her as immature and a slow learner, but they weren't really aware of the struggles she was facing. She was 5'5" in height and 110 pounds. Her upper front teeth protruded, and she had a surgical scar on her lower right leg. She was just sort of insecure and seeking acceptance from somewhere, and it seemed like everyone around her just seriously sucked at life. So in walks this guy, Russell Shelton Welsh, or Skip as he was popularly known. He was John's neighbor and a friend who frequently visited the family, and he was bad news. He was 43, worked as a painter, but mostly lived on disability payments. He was also a total meth addict who was consumed by his obsession with the Sasquatch, a mysterious cryptid known to all of us as Bigfoot. Now, Teresa had always been fascinated by Bigfoot. Her interest was piqued when she first heard Skip's stories about the legendary creature when he visited her house. His tales of mystery and wonder intrigued her, and as they spent time together, he would captivate her with his claims to have seen this elusive creature many times. But little did she know that her interest in his stories would lead her down a dark and dangerous path. So one day, Teresa tells her good friends Peggy and Janice that she's going to the mountains to go camping with this guy Skip, and that she was probably going to miss school for a few days because they were going to be searching for Bigfoot. So on the morning of June 1st, 1987, Skip goes to John's house. He sees Teresa is getting ready for school and offers to drive her. This turned out to be a ruse that he and Teresa had planned, and instead of taking her to school, he drives toward the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Later that day, John receives a call from Teresa's school. They inform her of her absence. Now, John is super shady, and he knows Skip supposedly dropped her off at school, but he's not sure of anything at this point. So in an effort to manage the situation himself, John tells the school that Teresa just wasn't feeling well. But later that day, he goes around town and starts asking people if they've seen Teresa. He also starts warning people that if she's with Skip, he is not a good person, and that she should not be around him. Which is kind of ironic because John also happens to actually be a terrible person himself. But anyway. That evening, around 9:30 p.m., after searching for Teresa everywhere that he could think of, John finally reports Teresa missing to the Fresno Police Department. The police start their investigation by questioning everyone who's a friend or family of Skip's, and they would start by questioning a 17-year-old girl named Michelle Ryan. Prior to that summer, Michelle Ryan had gone with Skip to the mountains because she was also completely enamored with his stories about Bigfoot and helping him find it. It's noted that Skip's daughter Chandra knew Michelle and had advised her against going to the mountains with her father. Apparently, Chandra knew that her dad liked to take young girls to the mountains and basically give them drugs so that he could have sexual relations with them. Michelle would go on to describe her trip as a traumatic trip with Skip. But she was honestly lucky that she made it home. Many believed that she was only able to make it home safely because she took 2 of her male friends with her as a precaution. It was reported that before Skip and Teresa headed to the mountains, they made a stop at his daughter Chandra's house. Skip was having trouble with his car, and Chandra told police that she had been visited by her father and a young girl who they presumed must have been Teresa. 4 days later, on June 5th, 1987, a police officer spots Skip's car by a trailer park near North Fork, a town in the foothills of the mountain. It would later be explained that Skip had come down the mountain to visit a friend, Dorothy Davis. Dorothy said at the time of Skip's visit, he seemed very high and very upset. He told her about a young girl that had been taken by a satanic group and was being kept in the Sierra. Davis said because he was high, she just assumed he was being delusional. 5 days after that, authorities were able to track down Skip at his mother's house in Sunnyside, Fresno. He was arrested for a previous drunk driving violation and also questioned about Teresa's disappearance. During questioning, investigators would note that he spoke very seriously about Bigfoot. He's like, guys, listen, I didn't want to sound nuts, but Bigfoot took this girl. And also, there's more Bigfoots up there living in that mountain. I talk with them often. And they're like, okay, guy, but like, maybe now tell us where this girl is. And this is where they notice that his story changes several times. Also, he's insisting on calling her Sam, and they're like, what is this guy's deal? He is the worst, and he's not giving us any straight answers. So at first, Skip says, okay, well, I dropped her off at school like I told her Uncle John that I would. But they know this isn't true because the school had contacted John to report her missing. And then he would claim that Teresa had basically ran away on her own accord. And then he said, okay, well, we did see Bigfoot a couple times and she was super excited about this, and then she ran away to find him. And then he eventually just said, okay, well, she was abducted by Bigfoot. He kidnapped her and carried her into the forest. At one point during the police interviews, without prompting from any officers, he made a statement that was quite chilling. He says, okay, so if they happen to find Teresa, there's not going to be any signs of sexual abuse. He claims that although Teresa had expressed a willingness to engage in a sexual relationship with him, he would have never been able to bring himself to engage in such an act with a young girl. That was not his nature. But like, why would you even suggest any of that in the first place if you don't have any idea where she is? Anyway, Skip agrees to show authorities where he and Teresa's campsite was. He leads them to a small grove of trees in the woods called Brown's Creek. There was a smoldering fire among a heavy layer of pine needles that appeared to be somewhat damp. This smoldering burnt area was approximately 3.5 feet wide by 8 feet long. There was a camera, a purse, a bra, a t-shirt, pictures of the countryside, and also pictures of Teresa. The campsite where all this was found turned out to be staged by Skip. Based on the photos, they were able to determine that the actual campsite was about 20 miles away in a whole other area of the woods called Ghost Canyon. But even though he had lied about the campsite, they still had to search it, and a helicopter spotted something on the hillside above the Browns Creek camp. It turned out to be a blue shirt that belonged to Skip, and it had meth in the pocket. Bloodhounds were brought in by the police to do a scent search, and they did find Teresa's scent, but they lost it shortly after, and no other evidence was found. Police are like, duh, this guy is obviously guilty of something, so they arrest him. However, without Teresa's remains, the most he could be charged with was child endangerment and child stealing. He was arraigned and released on his own recognizance, but due to a bail mix-up, he was rearrested. So 3 days before Skip was set to go to trial, he was released from prison because authorities didn't think they had enough evidence to get him convicted, and the prosecution didn't want to risk a case of double jeopardy in the case that Teresa's body was discovered. So they recommend a 1-year sentence for Skip if he signs a waiver allowing them to go forward with a murder charge if they ever find Teresa's body. Skip refuses to sign it. He's like, hell no, I'm not signing anything like that. Which is like, duh, of course he's not going to sign that waiver agreeing to a potential murder charge. But basically, they really figured that they would be able to eventually find her body and thus convict him for her murder. But unfortunately, Teresa's body was never found. So what happened to Teresa? The general consensus is that Skip murdered her. Whether he went up there, got high, and is unable to remember it, or whether he actually killed her, or if maybe Bigfoot is responsible, remains a mystery to this day. However, Skip's family came out with a theory shortly after that Teresa may have been killed by the Speed Freak Killers, 2 serial killers that were targeting and killing women at that time. Skip's daughter totally called him a predator at one time, but ended up coming to his defense later after Teresa went missing and claimed that her father's only crime was practicing poor judgment by taking a young girl to the Sierra. Skip died in 1998 due to coronary artery disease, taking to the grave the secret of what happened to Theresa Ann Bier. Despite the many years that have passed since Teresa's disappearance, the case remains open and unresolved. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Theresa Ann Bier, please contact the Fresno Police Department at 559-621-7000. Thanks for tuning in to Wine and Crime Time. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe for weekly true crime tales that we tell while getting toasty. See you in the next video. Toodaloo!